speaker is David Sable. And I'm going to be honest with everyone. I've been looking forward to David's presentation for months, and I'll tell you why. David is an outstanding investor in a niche of the market which many investors would love to invest in but don't feel qualified to invest in, and that's the area of life science investing. And I've been an admirer of David's for several years, so let me tell you a bit about his background and why we're lucky to have him with us this morning. David graduated from the Wharton School and University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. He trained in obstetrics and gynecology at the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center. He co-founded and served as director of the Institute for Reproductive Medicine and Science at St. Barnabas Medical Center in New Jersey. He was also founder or co-founder of 2 companies that ultimately got acquired. David is an adjunct professor in the Department of Biology at Columbia University, teaching a class entitled Entrepreneurship in Biotechnology. I think we'd all like to take that. Sounds really interesting. Last but not least, David is a portfolio manager of 2 life science funds at Special Situations Funds. I asked David if he could present on life science investing and to dumb it down so even a moron like me would understand it. And he said that's the only way he knows how to present. So I'm honored to have Dr. David Sable with us today. We look forward to your presentation. Thanks, David.
Well, thank you so much, Ian, and thanks for the invitation. This is a great group. This is very new for me, and I've got to say, David Gardner is a tough act to follow. I'm still having some of the stuff sink in that he was talking about, but what a terrific talk he gave. He made the point of being a generalist investor. It's like inch deep, mile wide. I'm about a millimeter wide and a little bit deeper than that. I have never spoken to a generalist group like this before, so this is new for me. I do a lot of speaking to academic groups and things of that sort. First thing I do, a couple of disclaimers. Just due to the place where I work, they have a very strict compliance department, and there's a lot of SEC rules regarding what we do. So I apologize up front. I cannot talk about where I work. I can't talk about individual stock names. I was learning so much from David before that I kind of was chomping at the bit to talk about in that way, but unfortunately I can't do that. But I would like to kind of pack in, I've got a semester-long course in the biotechnology industry and how to really invest in it and how it works as a business. I'm going to try to pack as much as I can of that into 25 minutes and then take as many questions as I can. This is Ian's title, The Only Dummy Here Is Me, because nobody can really figure out this is an industry that's too big for one individual. But with a sense of ambition tempered with humility, I'd like to kind of share what I know about it. So let's, if I can get my slides up here. There we go. So this is it's a talk on life sciences investing. This is as opposed to biotech investing. And a lot of people say, well, life science is biotech, right? And I want to make a pretty big distinction there. Earlier, David's talk, he talked about not trying to identify the specific industries where things are going. My North Star, the intellectual kind of overview of the way I look at the economy, the way I look at innovation, the way I look at progress, is aimed at finding that. And that's really why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And we're going to go into that a little bit. Now, as Ian said, my background is I was a doctor for a while and a bit of a businessman, bit of an entrepreneur within medicine. And then I had the opportunity to, given some career Brownian motion, make my way into the buy side, into the investing area. I would love to say that I had a very well thought out career map and say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to end up. But to be honest, it's just kind of one opportunity after another. And it's amazing to me that I look back on what was going to be a 1-year sabbatical from practicing medicine back in 2004. And now I've been doing this for 16 years. Now, when given the opportunity to become a healthcare investor, my assumption was, well, I know science, I know epidemiology and statistics, and I practiced medicine for 20 years. And boy, do I have an advantage going into this marketplace. And I've got to tell you, boy, was I wrong. I could name the mistake, I made it over and over and over again. There's a set of vocabularies, a set of experiences that you have in the investing market that nothing really prepares you for. And it's. I was taught well when I entered operating rooms and delivery rooms that you never stop learning, you never know everything, and that the best thing you can do is bring into it a sense of calm, a sense of curiosity. And again, I keep coming back to that word humility. And it's made me a better investor, it made me a better doctor. And that's the kind of way I would tell anyone to approach something life science, like life sciences or biotech investing. Now, presenting this talk, I want to acknowledge that there are probably some really outstanding life science investors that I'm talking to now. There's some of you that probably do this as well as I do. If we switch jobs, you could probably take my job and do a very, very good job of it. You wouldn't do it the same way. And there are some things that I pick up that you'd probably miss, or things that you'd pick up that I would miss. But it's not, there's no single great formula to it. But I would really just kind of like to go into the way I do it. Now, Ian challenged me. I told him, I'll be playing around with my slides probably up to about 2 minutes before I start talking. And sure enough, until David Gardner had me absolutely enthralled with what he was talking about, I was playing around with the slides. But he also challenged me to keep it to a small number. So this is it. This is my slide. We're going to jump around to a bunch of different ideas, but I don't want to do a lot of distractions by having a lot of visual stuff. I'm going to keep hopefully the numbers set up so that if any good questions come up, I can be interrupted any time. So we talked about the disclaimers, what I can talk about. And what I'd like to do is, there's a big picture aspect to life sciences and biology that transcends investing. It transcends the business world. It gets down to really just, it's a kind of an overall arching view of the economy and where the world is going. When I got the opportunity to move into the investing world, I took some time to study economics, to go back to looking at innovation as a whole. And one of the things I found, which I became more and more convinced of the more I read, and this has become reinforced year after year after year, is that if you're looking for rocket fuel to innovation, going back to building of the pyramids, going back to the building of the aqueducts, to what took us out of the dark ages into the Renaissance, what fueled the Industrial Revolution, the information technology revolution, it seems to be where we start replacing our method of thinking from sort of an analog pattern recognition, I know it when I see it kind of look at things, to a digital way, to something where we can start experimenting and reproducing our experiments in a way that they're accessible to everybody. This is when industries start scaling. So when we took basic chemistry from, the chemistry industry grew out of dyes, clothing dyes and things of that sort. We took basic chemistry, basic physics, and we learned the periodic table. We were able to start bringing math and engineering and scaling these things up. It just absolutely put the industrial and the mechanical engineering economy on rocket fuel in the 18th and 19th centuries. Get to the 20th century, and the late 20th century, we can do the same thing to communication and information technology. Now, when I studied this, it didn't occur to me that biology, which is the basis of everything, what I dedicated my life to starting in medical school in the 1980s on, was still a very analog pattern recognition process. We think of medicine as being so advanced and so so innovative and so but in reality, it was grounded in an old type of thinking. When I was in medical school, University of Pennsylvania in the 1980s, the people that were idolized were these kind of bow tie wearing internists that had something we called clinical judgment. They say, they knew everything. In a difficult case, find one of these people, they will tell you what's going on. And we worship these people. They seem to know everything. You give them a set of symptoms, and they would seem to know exactly the right little test to do. Where to put the stethoscope, what to probe, what to poke. And they would come up with these very obscure diagnoses. Now, fast forward to now. We're in 2020. What's happened since I was in medical school and now? Well, one is we have the Human Genome Project was elucidated. We now have the periodic table for the genome. We now have this kind of translation from what we observe, what we call phenotypically in science, when we see something with our own eyes, just see a pattern, to a way to digitalize it, get it down to a molecular level, something really, really key in a lock, rather than just like kind of a picture that we have to describe, and everybody describing it describes it a little differently. What's the other thing that we have is now we have this massive computing power. Compared to some of the things that we digitalized in the past, biology is so much more complicated. The universe is unbelievably complex. The universe is like a whiteboard compared to what's going on inside the human body. Human body is just unbelievably complicated. And frankly, our ability to model it, once we started getting this tremendous amount of genetic information, was we just didn't have the power. You go to now, we've got these unbelievably fast processors. We've got limitless memory and incredibly cheap storage. And now we've got, combining that with the genome, all this stuff in medicine that we're starting to unlock. And I'm going to use an example. When I was in medical school, and I will tie this into investing. When I was in medical school, lung cancer was a tumor in the lung. If you take that tumor out, you cut it up, you take a piece of it, put it under a microscope. There were two types. There was large cells, and small cells. So we broke down lung cancer into small cell lung cancer and, very creatively, non-small cell lung cancer. Nowadays, lung cancer, like most cancers, is defined by, it could be down to a single amino acid mutation. Amino acid is just a string, just the building blocks of proteins. And it's something that we can understand on so much more of a fundamental level. It's like going from pictures drawn on the side of a cave to beautifully written, English printed out on a computer. Just an ability to propagate the knowledge in a way that everybody sees the same way. Now, this translates into much more efficient innovation within biology and innovation within life sciences. And this fact that we have biology is, okay, that's the chosen area. That's our rocket fuel part of the economy now. That's where digitalization, the digitalization computing power is merging with this previously uncharted area of human knowledge that lets us solve unbelievable problems in the world. And what's the most fundamental problem in biology is healthcare. So, as opposed to the way a generalist investor may look at this part of the world, the way I look at it is, if you're looking at contributing to innovation, if you're looking at riding the wave of what's new in the economy, where you're profiting from it, or where to invest in, or where to work, where the most exciting stuff is going to happen. This is like getting into computers in the early 1980s, right before the IBM PC was introduced. Who could foresee where that was going to go? There was no internet back then. The first computer I ever bought sat on a desk, unattached to anything. It was dependent completely on me to enter whatever data went into it. And then it would play around with that data and give me some information, very limited. That's where we are right now in the year 2020 with biology. But biology is arguably a lot more complicated than communications. And some of the things that we're tackling in biology are much more fundamental to the problems that we have yet to solve, the things that people want to pour billions and billions and billions of dollars into to get those problems out of their lives. And for the first time, we have the opportunity to tackle those things. And to me, that's what makes life sciences that exciting. It doesn't help. It also helps that I've got a background in medicine and science. It makes it very exciting too. If you ask me to start investing in internet companies, or media companies or restaurants or cement companies or commodities or consumer discretionary, I'd be lost. So frankly, I live where I should live in the investing world. But that's kind of the overarching view of where I look at why people should be involved in life sciences and biotech right now. Now, moving over to the next box, life science lessons from The Empire Strikes Back. Now, as I've gotten older, my cultural references have become less and less relevant to a lot of people, but I'm hoping that there's some people out there that remember the original Star Wars movies. And about 2/3 of the way through The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker's having a lightsaber duel with Darth Vader, and he gets his hand cut off. Next scene, he's sitting at a table and a robot is replacing his hand. And he's like doing something else. He's reading the newspaper or something. And the robot finishes his hand, taps on the wrist a couple times. Luke Skywalker looks at the hand, flexes it a little bit, gets up and walks away. It's as if it's the most mundane thing in the world. And that, even back then, I think that was 1981 or whatever, that was very prophetic. I remember thinking, wow, that's probably the future of my lifetime. And it is the future of our lifetime. So what was it? It was artificial intelligence. It was machine learning. It was robotics. It was standardization of what had been an analog process, which is microsurgery. And to me, that was the future. So but it was also very important to me when I got into investing, because people think of life sciences, people think of biotechnology, this big lump sum area of investing. You need to be in biotech. When I got to the investing world, it was very surprising to me that the term biotechnology was different to everybody I talked to. If I talked to bankers, biotechnology was just small pharma companies, small companies that made medicine. If I talked to scientists, biotechnology was any process or product that came out of development on living cells and living tissue. A lot of room in there. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to think of my investing in just biotech, I am limiting myself as to what I'm doing, and I'm also being very imprecise as to how I'm communicating what I'm doing. So I throw the term biotechnology away, unless I'm talking about the building of proteins on Chinese hamster cell cultures. Very, very specific. So we prefer to think of it as life sciences. Life sciences is anything that's going to benefit from this confluence of digitalization and biology. It could be a device company. When I was in medical school and I did my orthopedic surgery rotation, we would get in and you had to put bars, like metal bars into people's backs, into their spines during spinal surgery to correct a deformity or to keep the spine from going in a direction you didn't want it to. We almost took those bars off the shelf and bent them over our knee to get the right angle. That's how primitive it was back in the 1980s. Fast forward to now, if you're going to go for surgery like that in the 2020s, you're going to have an MRI scan done. That MRI scan is going to be translated through some extremely sophisticated software to a special lathe that takes that bar and really precisely fits it to your spine. It's the way medicine should be. It's much more scientific and it's much more engineered. And that's life science, but it's not biotechnology. So if I was limiting myself to biotechnology, then I'm taking all these interesting, very cool, incredibly major innovations, and I'm just ignoring it. So anyone who's interested in moving into this confluence of digitalization and biology, look beyond biotechnology. Look beyond just pills and infused medicine and look into devices. Learn the lessons from The Empire Strikes Back and from where we're going through there. Now, how do you invest in life sciences? When I was taking my sabbatical out of medical practice, I was walking my children to school. There was a portfolio manager there who ran what was called a prop desk, proprietary trading desk. These died away after the 2008 financial crisis. What a prop desk was, and I know a lot of people in the audience know this, prop desk was banks like Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs would have tremendous pools of money and they would give them to traders and say, take our money and make more money. And this particular portfolio manager was a brilliant mathematician from Berkeley. And he had $8 billion of Deutsche Bank's money. and he had various ways that he had to make more money from it. And we used to talk a lot, and he knew I was a doctor, and we got to know each other well. And when he found out that I wasn't working, he said, listen, I've got an algorithm that every day spits out a long book and a short book in healthcare. Why don't you come along and tell me what you think? This was 2004. And each day, every Tuesday afternoon, I went there. He would give me the algorithm, give me the list. And I would say, no, this one should be long. This one should be short. I think the algorithm got it wrong. And frankly, 2004 algorithms were pretty primitive, and they got it wrong a lot. Well, that morphed into a full-time job. And a few weeks later, he came to me. He said, listen, I want to give you a little bit of money. Find a way to invest it and figure it out and see what you can do. Now, this was not the type of opportunity you get too often, so I took it very, very seriously. And I just did an absolute deep dive into investing. You know, it's like I went back to the days when I used to be up all night delivering babies, and I just stayed up all night learning portfolio analysis and portfolio management. So I started off really basic, and I started off with value investing. You know, Graham and Dodd, Warren Buffett. I read The Intelligent Investor. I read Securities Analysis. I read How to Be a Stock Market Genius. I started listening to Aswath Damodaran, who's the head of finance at NYU. Every one of his courses is online, which is amazing. I started listening to his lectures. And value investing was so attractive to me because it was so rational. It was so, it so went into the science background that I had and the engineering that I was kind of attracted to. You had very high degree of accuracy financials, retrospectively, that could be used to forecast into the future. You had very basic first and second order mathematical equations and discounted cash flow equations. And you could come up with very good numbers that you could compare to what the stock market was doing. And I thought, okay, well, that's rational. The stock market's reasonably rational. So if there's a big spread between those two, that makes a lot of sense. So I learned that. And then I said, all right, well, let's take the thesis of we can use value investing principles and apply it to this wild future world of biology and life sciences. And let's make that the basis of our investing. And I did that, and that was the primary book that I ran. But I did a bunch of other strategies. I did long short, I did market neutral, I did delta hedging, I did all sorts of stuff. Yeah, but my primary thesis was, let's merge value investing with life sciences and biotechnology. And I'm proud to tell you, it was an absolute disaster. It was terrible. Every one of my very well thought out thesis was just wrong. Because what turned out that the assumptions we can make about good value investments, that is relatively low risk data that you use as inputs, a fixed knowledge, good knowledge out in the marketplace, in a rational stock market, every one of those assumptions was wrong. Because as opposed to value investing, what's a good value investing stock? Something that makes money, something that you can apply to financial metrics. In life sciences, that's completely invalid. You've got products on the market that are either ideas or they're science experiments. You're not going to be making money for 5, 7, 10 years. So the validity of your inputs into your modeling is just out the window. Your assumptions have such a wide range to them. The risk of any individual experiment failing is so high that, it really just invalidates it. And I found that the assumption that you have a rational stock market was the most wrong, because the stock market's view of life science companies is based on the stock market in general and aggregates knowledge of science, which is much, much less than its knowledge of so many other sectors. So I was a complete failure that year at Deutsche Bank. I didn't lose money. Frankly, I got lucky, and I'm not that smart, but I was smart enough to realize that luck was what kept me in the game. So it kind of kept me humble about all this. And I had to rethink it. Well, the first thing I had to rethink was my view of the marketplace. It turns out the marketplace in life science is not a rational computer, big market. The stock market in life science is is an old beloved uncle whose hearing isn't very good and whose cognition depends on the topic you bring up. Some subjects, that old uncle of yours really is still very sharp. Others, he just doesn't get. So I found that with the stock market, you could feed a piece of information in the life sciences with a life sciences name, a life science stock. It could be a clinical trial result. It could be an FDA approval. And sometimes the stock market just analyzed it and instantaneously reacted in a very rational way. That's the topic that our beloved old uncle still remembers. And he happened to hear, his hearing was working well that day. There are other days when the stock market hears, and what to me is an equally understandable piece of data, and the market just doesn't get it, or it doesn't hear it. And it just goes, and the response that you see is just, it's just completely irrational. So we had to factor that into what we do. So what does that translate into? Okay, well, finally, a few years in, I guess recruited by a hedge fund, they asked me to take my strategy and form it into a fund. We went out, we raised money, and we put together, they wanted a biotech fund. I said, no, let's make it a life sciences fund. Let's take advantage of the digitalization of biology everywhere we can. And we put the strategy in place, and it's worked out very well ever since. That's going on since 2005. But I found that biotechnology, for you to do it right, you need to speak 5 languages. There's 5 aspects to it that I found that if I was wrong in any of them, then I would suddenly be deal to deal, transaction to transaction. I would be the sucker at the poker table. And those 5 languages are science, medicine, entrepreneurship, investing, and trading. More importantly to me, and this is just the way I do it, I start with science and I go in the other direction. If the investment falls off anywhere along that pathway, I stop. So if the science doesn't make sense to me, if I see that the configuration of the molecule is unstable, or it's been claimed to do things that I don't think it's going to do, based on my somewhat okay knowledge of organic chemistry and things of that sort, then I'm not going to wait around for the clinical trial to fail or the unexpected toxicity to come up, or the stock that's just going to get killed when people that own the stock realize that there's something wrong here. I'm just going to stop. There's thousands of companies in the life sciences universe. I'm not going to spend a lot of time if there's a flaw that I know there, even though the stock may do beautifully. The stock may do very, very well for a while until the world realizes, or sometimes I'll be wrong, but ultimately, to me, that flaw is going to show up. I'm not going to buy a car if I see that there's a problem with the axle, even if nobody else sees it. So I drop it there. If the science works, yet there's something in the medicine, if the clinical trial design is such that the assumption is that, I'm going to get a little wonky here, but we do something called a powering analysis. We say, okay, here's what we think is going to happen based on this, with this drug when we give it to a lot of people. We think that, if we measure the number that survive versus don't survive, they've got this type of cancer, then we're going to prove that this drug made a big difference. Well, I had one big job before I did this, and that was running in vitro fertilization programs. And the great thing about running IVF is you're either pregnant or you're not. And there's a lot of things that you can do to help it along, but there's a lot of times you just don't know why an IVF cycle worked or it didn't. Well, clinical trials are the same thing. And just with a basic knowledge of biostatistics and epidemiology, that if you're looking enough times, whether something's going to work or something's not going to work. So the science got to work, then the medicine's going to work. I said, okay, if that's it, then it passes the life sciences part. And then we're really at square one. Then we're starting to say, okay, is this a good investment? A recommendation, if you're meeting a biotech company, you have the opportunity. What you'll find is that they present themselves as if the company just fell from the sky in its current incarnation, exactly as it is now. The drugs that they're developing are in this trial. They the stuff that they're about to sell or about to take in front of the FDA. This is where we are. The reality is there was a long, dirty, meandering story that got them there. And you're going to learn a lot more by asking them, listen, throw your PowerPoint away. Tell me the story about how this company got there. And it's a lot more, it may be very, very validating. You may say, boy, these people really know what they're doing. Or it may be that, boy, they just kept putting out fires and just now the story sounds good. And it's the way a lot of life science companies are. So you get to there, you get to the assessing the company. And that's where a lot of the criteria that David brought up so expertly in his talk a little while ago come into. Okay, let's forget the science, forget the medicine now. Okay, we've passed that. Now we're at the entrepreneurship stage, the company stage. This is a company that's worthwhile. Is their vision, their strategy, and all that going to work? Okay, if that's okay, is it a good investment? And here, it's a little bit tougher. Here again, you can't rely on financial metrics. You can't rely on projections because these companies may be years away from revenue. So there's a whole other set of criteria that we use to decide if like a biotech company or a medical device company that's just about to launch is going to gain traction. And that's you need to define a tier of value inflections. Things that while we can't put numbers on them, we say, okay, this is so much better in proof of concept. This tells us, yes, that all their claims mean something, that it's likely that this company is going to be worth more going forward than it is now. Second criteria we've got to look at is these are cash burning companies. So not only do we have to predict the value of the company in a kind of platonic sense, that their assets have proven they're worth more than they were when we bought them, based on something other than revenue and what they're doing in the marketplace. But we need to kind of go to where, skate to where the puck is going for the financing market, because they're going to be going back to the marketplace to sell stock again. Are they going to be doing it at a higher valuation or a lower valuation? So it's kind of, becomes kind of a three-dimensional chess game. And I would say that you've got to be comfortable with each one of these dimensions, so you're not kind of the one that the professional investors take advantage of. Now, that said, there are some incredibly good small investors that do superbly well in biotech and life sciences. And that's where we get to the biotech, the life sciences without tiers type strategies. I've got a staff of 12 where I work, and I've got a background studying this stuff for a professional lifetime. You don't necessarily need that to be able to do well in this kind of marketplace. So what does that mean? Well, part of it is, I know that Ian's platform and David's Motley Fool platform are involved in identifying individual stocks that do phenomenally well, and I love that. I think it's great. I would say that with this particular micro area of the economy we're talking about, I don't think it's a bad idea to make a bet on the confluence of biology and digitalization. And you can do that. There are some outstanding ETFs or some mutual funds that do this, very well designed to be very investor friendly, like not a lot of fees and stuff like that. There's even subspecialty ETFs that do, for example, China biotech or immuno-oncology, which is that area of biotechnology that uses your body's own immune system. You rev it up to attack disease. It's an incredibly exciting area of biotechnology right now. So you may not feel that you're ready to pick the winners, the individual stocks, and you may not feel that you can stomach the volatility of individual small or micro-cap biotech stocks, which is, even I'm not comfortable putting a lot on a single small biotech stock, given my background. But you can do that. You can do a nice diversified portfolio in a way. You do have access to that, which I think is great. Now, there are other strategies too. I've seen a lot of smart people do well with like a 13F strategy. You do a little work where you find the really large professional life sciences investors and you find out what they own. And you can, in a diversified way, do your work and cut your teeth learning on the stuff that they've done. And you can spend a lot of time learning this very exciting part of the economy. And the great thing is you don't have to use your money to do it. You can build model portfolios. And once you feel comfortable enough that you've got enough of the vocabulary under your belt, you can say, great, I'm ready to start investing here in ways that leverage this rocket-fueled part of the economy without being the underprepared participant in the marketplace, working in the old beloved uncle, difficult to predict part of the stock market. The last part is this is a part of the marketplace that really lends itself to, you roll your eyes, this is such an old strategy, like a pick and shovel strategy. In the past decade, there have been hundreds of billions of dollars of innovation capital and venture capital poured into pre-revenue biotech companies. Where has all that money gone? It's all gone into things like bioprocessing, biomanufacturing, contract research. These are companies that are growing with the industry. Every one of those clinical trials that gets done, whether the company succeeds or fails, has to get paid for. Every big Alzheimer's disease trial requiring millions and millions and millions of dollars of drug to do the trial, whether it succeeds or fails, somebody has to make that drug. And as all this money is going into forming these companies, and these companies doing new and exciting types of manufacturing, they hire someone else to do it. And you can, same way when we invested in the gold, the gold prospectors by doing picks and shovels and blue jeans, you can profit in this part of the economy without exposing yourself to the risk of these individual companies, individual clinical trials and things of that sort. So there are strategies that you can put to work right now if you bought into the idea that, this is one of the most exciting areas of the economy, but I may lack one of those 5 language fluencies to do it in a super educated way. Or I want to put a lot of money or a certain amount of money into this area without putting too much, but I don't want it to be super, super high risk. This is a great strategy to potentially follow. Now, the next part I'm going to get into is, here's the controversial stuff. Here's the, if you really feel that you want to trade, if you really want to feel that you want to make bets within biotechnology, if you are drawn to that list of stocks every day that go up 100%, 200% in a week, these kind of high flyers that will do that within biotech, and you're willing to put a blind eye to the ones that do the opposite, because we see that too, there's a couple of things you should look at too. Now, if you're going to trade and you're looking for that super types of returns, then you're looking at binary events, clinical trial outcomes, FDA readouts, and things of that sort. And what you want to do is you want to approach that rationally. So you're going to look at data, you can have data thrown at you. The data will show in the tiny trial, this percentage of people responded versus the placebo, or this percentage versus some other treatment. Take those percentages and turn them into numbers, because sometimes that percentage that seems so impressive is like 10 patients versus 6 patients. So be careful about the way you look at the data that's used to prove that something's going to work. If it's given you in sheer numbers, turn it to percentages. Another thing that you can do, wait till after the readout of the clinical trial. Wait till after the fireworks have gone off and the stock has gone like crazy. Because at that point, you may be able to model things in a much more rational way. And you may find out, despite the fact that the stock went crazy over one headline, that it still has a real long way to go. And you've sidestepped the risk of that thing going wrong and going to zero, and you can still profit from it. The last thing, I'm going to just give you a little bit of an inside baseball thing that I love sharing with my own investors and anybody looking at this. And that is, if you're looking at investing in healthcare and you're looking at investing in life sciences, within medicine, there are areas that are really taking advantage of this digitalization and there are areas that aren't. There's advanced areas where you can handicap outcomes and look at data in one way that means something, and there are areas that you can't, but it's still lagging behind. I'm going to, this is the last point I want to make, and then I want to get to questions. The first thing is, let's look at oncology. Talked before about lung cancer, talked about how we take the tumor out, put it in the lab, do experiments, we can define the cancer by down to a single amino acid. That's incredible. But if you look at things like neurology, we can't get inside the central nervous system. The body does too good a job of protecting it. So there's a reason that all the Alzheimer's disease trials fail, because they're not based on the type of science and engineering that oncology is. When you're looking at life science investing, try to get an idea for the quality of the data that we're making our assumptions in, because that to me has been really what stratifies the stuff that you can make big bets on and the stuff that you just don't want to go near because nobody really knows what the outcomes are. Now, I could go on forever about this stuff. I could, yeah, believe me, it's like, don't get me started. But I've got a short period of time. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I realize it's a little bit different than a lot of the types of presentations you get, and I'd love to answer any questions you have. Ian, I hope that was helpful for your group.
It was excellent. Maybe we'll end the screen share if you can, David. And then just want to remind people, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to ask a question in that field.
Ian, I think I'm not hearing you, so I'm afraid.
Oh, can anybody hear me?
Anybody right now? Let me see if my
I can hear you, Ian.
Headphones.
Okay.
Yeah, they're on.
Okay. Mike, why don't you go ahead and ask the questions?
So, David, thanks for the overview or the,
For some reason,
presentation.
I'm not hearing anything.
Oh,
I'm talking. Can you hear me, Ian?
I can hear you, Mike.
Okay.
Now I can hear you.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
No problem. So in terms of the areas you focus on, I kind of think of, and I might have the wrong view of this, but I think of, I don't know if you want to call it the healthcare space or whatever, is maybe I break it into like 3 buckets. So you have new drug, companies or investigational, sort of existing drug companies that maybe are developed, that have a proven drug and or a set of drugs and are kind of growing them through the market. And then you've got the equipment or device business. First of all, did I do it the business justice in breaking it into those 3 categories? And secondly, what areas do you focus on and how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a logical, rational, and not the way I look at it, though. I tend to look at it in a very, from my own, reflecting my own biases. There's the stuff where the primary language being spoken is science, and there's language, and there's where it's not. Yeah, you're completely right. There is areas in the pharmaceutical and the biotech sector that it's just sales. It's just, you're looking at the sales, you're looking at the competition, you're looking at market share. It's almost non-healthcare. It's just one more product. And there it's like, you can do phenomenal type of analytical work on that. It's just not where my own personal core talent is. So I am invested in some of those companies because I'll do some of that same type of analysis. But when I was brought in and I've got to define, okay, what's my edge? It's not so much in the revenue producing companies, although in a lot of those companies, the real value is in the pipeline. And if you back out and you separate the commercial part, okay, let's break it into different companies. The commercial company's worth this. And then the real difference is, am I finding a diamond in the rough? Or even a diamond, a bunch of diamonds in the rough that dwarf the value of the commercial company? Or is it a commercial company dragging along this weighty trailer with no air in the tires? That's the drug development company. So there is that aspect to it. The other part is, I looked at things the same way you did in separating drugs from devices for a while. Because I figured, okay, drugs, there's just so much science to it, they're so complicated, and you've got to run this experiment where you take a molecule, you stick it in the human body that's never been before, and it can kill the patient, or we don't really know what it does. And a device, what's a device? A device is an energy source attached to a delivery system. It's really not particularly complicated. And then I got a little bit more nuanced, Because you think about it, that company that we talked about before, where we're doing kind of artisanal design of spinal rods using very, very complex software and algorithms for spinal surgery. That is precision medicine. That's life science. That's the confluence of biology and digitalization, just like biotech. It's not a simple device. It's not like a pump. It's not one new type of knee brace, but it kind of blurs those categorical lines. So I found that my investing got a hell of a lot better when I kind of threw out that imprecise categorization and started drawing my own categories. So rather than look at pre-commercial biotech and post-commercial biotech, I look at pre-proof of concept biotech and post-proof of, or pre-efficacy biotech and post-efficacy biotech. Where do I know that the science is starting to translate into real clinical benefit? When are we really chipping away and really providing some risk mitigation to what it is that they're developing? Where does the science tell me that this goes from could work to should work and should be priced accordingly? So it's, yeah, I buy into everything you say is completely rational. It's just time has taught me, sometimes painfully, that I've got to look at it from a little bit different bias set, and it's helped my investing.
So where do you look at, or how is the FDA process sort of fit into where you're looking at companies? Are you looking at sort of soup to nuts anywhere through that process, or like in sort of a more specific area?
Yeah, I'll look. I shop in the dollar store. So you will find terrific assets for where they are in development, anywhere from idea through commercialization. And as you can imagine, given the 5 languages you need to speak to do, rational, good life sciences investing, the efficiency of pricing is just crazy. So I'm always looking for things that just seem, why is it that cheap? That's something I've learned the hard way. A lot of times when something is that cheap, there's a reason for it. Like that article I wrote, My First Really Dumb Trade. I hate to say it, that's been followed by a lot of other really dumb trades. But that'll always happen. But anytime something just doesn't seem right for where it is, that's where I look. So it could be right before the FDA does a decision. It could be after the FDA does a decision. It could be earliest stages of drug development. It could be in phase 1. Phase 1 is usually when you give a drug to people for the first time, often healthy volunteers. You just want to make sure it doesn't kill anybody. But there are sometimes you can give a drug in phase 1 and the market just says, okay, well, it's safe. That means it goes to phase 2. Phase 2 is the first trial where you do that shows that it can actually help people, not just not hurt them. Or sometimes you can look at things that happen in phase 1 and say, oh, no, there's more here that this trial is giving us. And the marketplace hasn't recognized that. So there's all sorts of value arbitrages that you can use, bringing different levels of understanding to life sciences investing, as long as you don't try to be too smart. You got to be, every time you think you're right and everybody else is wrong, 9 times out of 10, no, you're actually the one who's wrong. So you got to be very cautious, either in asset allocation to those ideas, or in just having a real high bar before you said, oh yeah, I'm the genius here, and everybody else doesn't get it. It's very easy to fall into that. I will say, along the same lines, risk mitigation in life sciences investing, like I do this for a living. I never use margin. I almost never short stocks. The math just doesn't work. You can only gain 100% of a short sale. And given that the market may understand differently than you do, and they may translate that difference in understanding to running it up so in your face that your tiny short position just ruins your life. So I'd be very, very cautious about doing that type of thing in life sciences investing. Okay.
Hi, David. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you think about, the way you manage your portfolios? How diversified are they? You know, when you look back over the last, several years, how do you think about, batting average versus slugging percentage? How many do you think you were right on? What percentage of those ended up, being the big winners? Obviously, power laws are pretty prominent in your type of investing. Just curious how that shakes out.
Yeah, no, we make our money on our 10x's to 100x's. Just in terms of managing a portfolio, and I'm talking in the abstract now. I'm not talking about my own fund. It's similar to echoing what David said. Even in the weird world of life science investing, when things work, they continue to accrue working. And especially as the stepwise value inflections really magnify the benefit of getting in early on something that makes sense in life sciences. If you have something that's a great platform but hasn't been in humans yet, and then you give it to humans and it doesn't hurt anybody, first of all, that also tells you that management knows how to run a trial. And then the drug shows that can help someone, then you're off to the races. Really, because the accumulation of benefit, you recognize that in life sciences, you're talking about end products with gross margins that are often 90 to 95% and higher. So the closer you get to the marketplace, talk about a moat. You've got 20 years of patent protection. You may have FDA fast track designation. You may have different things that protect your marketplace. It's just incredible. And so the more you accrue proof of concept in a life science name, the more the value increases at increasing rates. So cutting exposure really doesn't make sense. Similarly, the nature of the marketplace in a company that needs to be refinanced periodically, if something is not working, there's every possibility that that company is going to be refinanced at a lower valuation. So why stick around? If you still love it, buy it later, it's cheaper. It's also a way of, in theory, managing your tax exposure. Because if we're going to hold things for very, very long times, many of which will be acquired and things like that, you may have enormous gains. And hopefully there will be capital gains. But if you do have short-term gains, like if one of your companies gets acquired relatively quickly at a high multiple, if you are quick to realize losses from things that just don't seem to be going well, you can always buy it back. Then you're mitigating your tax. There's an implicit tax strategy there as well. So depending on what your tax concerns are, and again, I'm talking just theoretically. So there's a lot of reasons to, in this particular sector, to get heavy, you really believe in something and hang on to it. Let it continue to accrue its value in the marketplace over time. That's what's worked for us.
Maybe one more question.
Sure.
How much emphasis do you put on the management team, the CEO, their history of success, the jockey versus the horse, which would probably be the science in this court? Or how do you weigh that?
Yeah, I am management team's nightmare. I can't do it quite as much as I used to. I never wanted to go into a management meeting with them knowing I had a science background. It's one of the things that differentiates the business world from the scientific and medical world is now in every world, people will lie to you at some point, but they'll also spin things and they'll also selective mention of different things. And in scientific data, you can present things that can be very misleading. And in the business world, everything's zero sum. And if you present something to me and I don't pick up on it, it's my bad. Frankly, in the medicine and academic world, if you present something in a misleading way, it's you're bad for doing that. But it's okay. We're all grown-ups. We're adults. It's the nature of the business. So one of my jobs is to be a human BS meter, to pick out where the data really doesn't add up, or just to call it out in a way that we talked before about. The company says, oh, X percent responded to our drug versus this much lower percent responded to this. And I'll just look at them all and say, you're talking about 12 people versus 6 people. In an outcome that has incredible variability per measurement. So if you apply statistics, that it really doesn't tell us. So let's dig into that. So what I do, it's not necessarily the background, the track record, although that can mean a lot. A lot of it is I'm assessing management's ability to understand what they're working with. How much do they know about this stuff? How good are they going to be at developing clinical trials? How good are they at communicating? What's their pedigree in terms of value creation, independent of, based on the inputs into that value creation, honesty, intellect, how many of these 5 languages do they speak? Because the same way, the 5 that I need to develop, they need to be super developed well as a hyper acute sensitivity to the specific stuff that they're working at. So yeah, track record means a lot, but you can have people walking into my first company and they have so many different ways of validating themselves, even without that track record. Similarly, there are people walking with a pretty good track record. By the end of the 1-hour meeting, I say, I don't care what they've done in the past. They're not getting a dime of my investors' money. I just can't discount the validity of what they're telling me appropriately enough.
I appreciate that answer. And thanks for being here this morning. I know we all learned quite a bit from you, and I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and good luck, and thanks for making me part of the event.
Thank you. Thanks.